Mind telling me what's in the briefcase, sir?
It contains privileged documents. I am an attorney.
Where are you coming from? Show me what's in the briefcase.
Now!
The streetlight flickered above the curb, casting fractured shadows across Malik Thompson's sharp features. He clutched his briefcase tighter, the worn leather biting into his knuckles. The night had been ordinary until now. Until a uniformed officer stepped from the patrol car, his boots crunching against the wet asphalt like an ominous drumbeat. "Step out of the car, Smuggler." The officer barked, eyes narrowing at Malik's dark skin before even glancing at his polished suit or briefcase. Malik froze, disbelief twisting in his chest. The word smuggler, sharp and degrading, lodged like a knife. He opened his mouth to protest, but the officer's hand hovered over his taser, impatient and threatening. Around them, passers-by hurried by, their gazes dropping, indifferent. The officer circled, examining Malik's belongings as though instinct alone could determine guilt. Malik's heartbeat thumped loud enough to echo in his ears. Each second stretched into a small eternity of humiliation. I work for customs," Malik stammered, his voice trembling. "I'm the director." The officer laughed, harsh and final, a sound that confirmed Malik's worst fear. He wouldn't believe him. The briefcase was yanked open. Papers and official badges spilled onto the wet street. Lights from passing cars glinted on a small metal emblem, the insignia of the city's customs office. The officer froze for a split second, then smirked. But before Malik could reclaim his evidence, the officer slammed the case shut. "You're coming with me," he said. Malik's stomach turned. This was no mistake. The night had just begun. The damp air clung to Malik Thompson's skin as he stepped out of his car, briefcase in hand. The streetlight above flickered, painting fractured shadows across the asphalt. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a work email. But he ignored it. Something felt off. A patrol car rolled up, its engine growling like a predator. The officer emerged, boots cracking against the wet concrete. Malik froze, a cold knot forming in his stomach. "Step out of the car, Smuggler." The officer barked, eyes narrowing at Malik's dark skin before even glancing at his tailored suit or briefcase. Malik's mouth opened, then closed. "Excuse me." The officer's smirk widened. "I said step out. Don't try to play smart." Around them, a few pedestrians hurried past, avoiding eye contact. The rain glistened on the officer's badge. Malik's briefcase weighed like a brick in his hand. Suddenly more than just leather and papers, a fragile symbol of identity he feared might crumble under the officer's assumption. I work for customs," Malik stammered. "I'm the director." The officer chuckled, a harsh, short laugh that bit into Malik's ears. "Yeah, right. Sure you are." Malik felt every eye on him, every step of humiliation etched into his chest. He opened the briefcase to show the official insignia. Documents spilled into the rain. The metal badge gleamed under the flickering streetlight. The officer glanced down, then back up, eyes cold. "You're coming with me." Malik's pulse surged. He wanted to argue, to shout, to make the world understand he had done nothing wrong. Yet every instinct screamed caution. He stepped forward reluctantly, the wet asphalt slipping under his polished shoes. Inside the patrol car, Malik sat silently. The door closed with a thud that felt like a gavel. Rain streaked the windows. The city lights blurred like smeared ink. "Name?" the officer demanded. "Malik Thompson, Customs Director. My ID is—" "Save it," the officer snapped, cutting him off. "We'll sort it out at the station." Malik's hands trembled, not from fear of physical harm, but from the insidious bite of systemic power. He knew he could fight, but in that moment, the odds felt stacked against him, and the night stretched endlessly ahead. As the car pulled into the precinct lot, sirens wailing in the distance, Malik realized the humiliation was only beginning. And somewhere in the shadows, he knew the fight for justice would be far harder than he had imagined. The precinct smelled of antiseptic and old coffee, a sterile warning that bureaucracy ruled here. Malik followed the officer down the narrow hallway, the harsh fluorescent lights bouncing off gray linoleum, casting every movement in stark clarity. Wait here, the officer said, tossing Malik onto a hard plastic chair in the interrogation room. Don't move. Malik's palms itched against the chair's armrests. He swallowed and tried to calm the storm of thoughts in his head. Director of Customs. Years of service. And yet he felt naked, invisible under the gaze of someone convinced of his guilt before even speaking a word. The door opened again. Another officer, younger, with a clipboard and bored eyes, stepped inside. Name? Malik Thompson. Director of City Customs, Malik replied, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. I have identification. Just answer the questions, the young officer interrupted. His tone was flat, almost rehearsed. Where were you coming from? What's in the briefcase? Work documents, Malik said. Official reports. Identification. You can verify with my office. The older officer snorted. Sure, of course. Right? You expect us to believe a customs director drives around at night with, what was it, a briefcase full of papers? Come on. Malik clenched his jaw. These aren't papers. They're evidence of my job. You can call my office. You think we're that gullible? The officer asked, leaning closer. His badge glinted under the harsh lights. We see plenty of people pretending to be officials. But you fit the profile. Malik's stomach nodded. Profile? You know what I mean, the officer said, voice low but sharp. Dark skin, expensive car. Always seems like the rich ones are hiding something. Malik's heart thudded painfully. I'm being targeted because of my skin. The officer shrugged. That's not my problem. You're here. We ask questions. You answer. Silence filled the room. Only the faint hum of fluorescent lights dared to interrupt. Malik pulled out his phone, fingers shaking. He opened the camera app, pretending to scroll, silently documenting the encounter. Evidence, he reminded himself. Evidence that would matter. The younger officer scribbled something on his clipboard, never looking up. Any weapons? No, Malik said. Just my briefcase. Nothing else. Hand it over, the older officer said abruptly. Malik hesitated, weighing his options. He had the right to protect his documents, but defiance might provoke escalation. Slowly, he opened the briefcase. Papers, folders, and his ID spilled onto the metal table. The older officer's eyes darted to the badge and official seal. He made a dismissive gesture, though Malik caught the flicker of surprise in his gaze. This is official, Malik said firmly. I am not lying. You can verify my identity. This is my job, my responsibility. You cannot treat me like a criminal. The officer leaned back, smirking. We'll see about that. Malik's pulse spiked. We'll see? Or you'll just assume what you want. The younger officer looked up for the first time, frowning. Maybe we should call headquarters? No, the older officer snapped. We're handling this here. Sit down. Malik sank back into the chair, jaw tight. He could feel every minute stretching, each second a reminder that power did not favor him. A knock at the door distracted him. A uniformed sergeant appeared, clipboard in hand. Complaint filed, the sergeant asked the officers. The older officer shook his head. Not yet, just sorting things out. Malik's stomach clenched. Sorting things out? Sorting me out? The sergeant hesitated, then offered a perfunctory nod toward Malik. Sir, you can file a formal complaint if you wish. Protocol dictates. I want to file it now, Malik said, voice stronger than he felt. The older officer's eyes flicked toward him. Fine, file it. Won't change much. Malik's hands shook as he filled out the paperwork. Every word was a mixture of frustration and clarity. This was not just about him. It was about accountability. The officer's sneer, the dismissive bureaucracy, the unspoken assumptions. It was all a small reflection of a larger system. Hours passed, conversations looping in circular politeness, punctuated by harsh commands. Malik's phone recorded every microaggression, every dismissive glance, every implicit bias that filled the room. Finally, the older officer leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. You'll get a call. That's all I can promise. Malik exhaled, tension leaving his shoulders in one slow wave. But relief was fleeting. The humiliation remained, heavy in his chest. He understood that the fight was only beginning. The paperwork was filed, the officer's dismissiveness documented. Justice might be possible, but not without strategy, patience, and resilience. He left the precinct that night, wet rain dripping down his suit, briefcase in hand, a silent determination building. The city around him moved without notice, but Malik knew he carried the weight of the story, and he was not going to let it end in silence. Malik stepped out of the precinct, the rain-slick streets reflecting neon signs and streetlights in fragmented shards. His phone buzzed relentlessly, notifications piling up. At first glance, it seemed like minor chatter, but as he scrolled, the depth of the fallout hit him. Tweets, posts, blurred images of him standing by the patrol car, captions twisting his identity into something criminal. "He called me a smuggler," Malik muttered under his breath, shoulders tense. His reflection shimmered in a puddle, a man caught between disbelief and fury. "Malik, are you okay?" His colleague, Jamal, appeared, umbrella in hand, eyes wide with concern. I'm fine," Malik said, though his voice faltered. The precinct, the officer... "I saw the clips online," Jamal said. "People are already talking. Some defending him, others calling him out. It's complicated." "Defending him?" Malik's hand tightened around his briefcase. "I was doing my job. Standing there, showing my ID. And he laughed, Jamal. He laughed at me." "Some people only see what they want," Jamal said quietly. "Ignore the noise. But you might want to brace yourself." Malik's stomach churned. He imagined his family seeing the posts. His younger sister texting frantic questions. His parents wondering if their son, the city's customs director, had lost control over his own life. The humiliation was no longer private. It had been amplified, digitized, shared, and dissected. Later that day at the office, Malik walked through the halls with the awareness of eyes flicking toward him, whispers curling into corners. "You okay, Malik?" asked the junior analyst. "I'm fine," he said, forcing calm. The analyst nodded but glanced down, unsure. In meetings, Malik noticed subtle changes. Colleagues who once greeted him warmly now hesitated, offering polite smiles that never reached their eyes. "The whole precinct thing," one muttered under their breath. "Crazy." He felt the microaggressions layering, each a silent accusation. "Are you really who you say you are? Do you deserve your position?" Every glance, every tone was a reminder of his outsider status in a system built to assume his guilt before evidence. At home, his phone rang constantly. Reporters, lawyers, friends, and strangers all demanded pieces of the story. Malik's wife, Aisha, sat beside him, hand on his knee. "They don't get it, do they?" Malik asked quietly, frustration and exhaustion coloring his voice. "They don't," Aisha said. "But you can't let them define you. You know the truth, and you're smart enough to show it." He nodded, but the weight of systemic bias pressed down like heavy chains. Not every battle would be visible. Not every injustice would have witnesses. Yet, this one would. This one had to. By evening, Malik returned to his apartment, rain dripping from his hair, the city alive with lights and indifferent noises. He scrolled through social media once more. Screenshots of his confrontation circulated, some calling him brave, others mocking, and a few outright defending the officer. Comments varied from sympathy to outright dismissal. Probably just a misunderstanding. One read, "Smug rich guy thinks he's untouchable." Another sneered, "He's actually a director?" One asked, disbelief in plain text. Malik's jaw clenched. The misinformation spread faster than truth could travel. He started jotting notes, documenting the timeline, collecting screenshots, preparing for what was to come. Evidence wasn't just about the precinct. It was about the story, about proving that systemic bias was real and sometimes painfully public. Jamal called again, voice a mixture of concern and urgency. "Malik, people are talking at the council meeting tomorrow. They're asking questions, and you might get dragged into it." "Let them ask," Malik said. His voice held a steely edge. "I'll answer truthfully. That's all I can do." Later, alone, Malik stared out the window at the city below. Rain blurred the streets into a watery mosaic of lights and shadows. He felt a flicker of anger, yes, but also resolve. Humiliation could not define him. Not now. Not ever. Somewhere, deep inside, Malik knew the fight was no longer just personal. It was societal. The officer had weaponized his authority, and the city had allowed it to ripple outward unchecked. But Malik was determined. He would fight back, and this time the world would have to see not the caricature the officer painted, but the man he truly was. And beneath the flood of injustice, one thought persisted. The system could be challenged one truth at a time. The administrative office smelled of disinfectant and old carpet, a sterile arena where rules mattered more than truth. Malik walked in, briefcase in hand, and approached the front desk. A clerk looked up, eyes calculating. "Can I help you?" she asked, pen poised over a stack of forms. "I need to file a complaint," Malik said. His voice was calm, measured, though a thread of frustration undercut every word. Official misconduct, racism, assault on my rights. The clerk raised a brow. "Do you have the incident number?" Malik's stomach sank. "It happened tonight, at the precinct. I was humiliated. An officer called me a smuggler. Refused to acknowledge my position. You'll need a completed form," the clerk interrupted, voice clipped, indifferent. "We can't accept verbal statements. This is policy." Malik nodded, forcing patience. He knew policy often shielded bias. He pulled a printed form from his briefcase and began filling in the details, describing every word, every look, every gesture. The clerk scanned his words. "Be concise. You're supposed to stick to facts. No opinions." Malik's jaw tightened. All of this is factual. Every word is what was said. Another officer entered, clipboard in hand. "Complaint?" he asked, voice casual. "Yes," Malik said, holding the form out. "I am submitting it." The officer glanced at the paper, smirked. "We get a lot of these. Mostly misunderstandings, you know. Things blown out of proportion." Malik felt heat rise in his chest. "This isn't a misunderstanding. An officer publicly humiliated me, ignored my credentials, refused to follow protocol. That's misconduct. That's bias." The clerk tapped her pen against the desk. "All complaints are logged, sir, but full investigations aren't guaranteed. Resources are limited." "You mean we'll see if it matters?" Malik said sharply. "If my case is convenient for your system." The officer shrugged. "Exactly." Malik's hands itched to slam the briefcase shut, but he restrained himself. He had fought his entire career with patience and diplomacy. Rage wouldn't help here. Evidence would. He took a deep breath. "I will document everything. Witnesses, screenshots, timeline. This is not just about tonight. It's about systemic failure. You cannot dismiss it." The clerk scribbled something on the form without looking up. "Protocol. Followed. Case logged. You'll receive a reference number." Malik accepted the flimsy slip of paper like a bitter victory. One small proof that he had attempted the formal route. Even if the bureaucracy would slow, obscure, or dismiss it. He asked, "Who will review this? Who ensures accountability?" The officer leaned casually against the wall. "Internal affairs. Or maybe the supervisor. Depends on the workload. Don't expect fast action. Fast action isn't how we operate." Malik exhaled, tension coiling tighter. "So, the system protects those in power and punishes those without?" The officer smiled thinly. "You catch on quick." A sense of isolation washed over him. Even when rules existed, they seemed designed to neutralize the complaints of the marginalized. Every word he had spoken, every document he had filed, could be delayed, buried, or ignored. He looked around the room, walls lined with plaques, awards celebrating justice and integrity. Everything looked official, trustworthy, but the officer's eyes, the clerk's indifference, told another story entirely. Symbolism masked dysfunction. Malik's phone vibrated. A text from Jamal. "Don't let them intimidate you. Keep records. Public attention will help." He replied, already documenting, step by step. By evening, Malik left the administrative office with a sense of grim determination. Every step was heavy, yet purposeful. The city had its systems, flawed, biased, and slow, but he had his own. At home, he spread the documents on the dining table, lined them up meticulously. Screenshots of social media posts, timestamps of the incident, videos from bystanders, copies of his official credentials. Every piece told the same story. An officer had abused power. The bureaucracy had ignored procedure, and the city's systems were insufficient to protect the innocent. Aisha watched silently. "It's a lot," she said softly. "Are you sure you want to keep going?" "I have to," Malik replied. His eyes met hers. "If I stop, it becomes acceptable. It becomes normal for them to humiliate, to silence. I can't let that happen, not just to me, but to anyone else who might be next." She nodded, squeezing his hand. "Then we fight, carefully, strategically." Malik exhaled and sat back, absorbing the weight of both the system and his responsibility. Every conversation at the precinct, every dismissive gesture, every coded phrase had been a lesson in patience, documentation, and strategy. He was learning how the system shielded itself, how power could be abused quietly and legally. But he also understood every system had a crack. Every act of injustice left evidence behind. And sometimes the smallest cracks could be the beginning of a flood. The night grew quiet, the city lights shimmering through rain-streaked windows. Malik stared at the papers, evidence meticulously collected. The officer had believed his authority absolute. Malik knew otherwise. Justice would be slow, but it would be intentional, precise, and undeniable. And somewhere deep in him, a quiet resolve settled. The officer would not get away with it. Not this time. Malik sat in his office, the city skyline bleeding into shades of orange and gray through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His briefcase rested on the desk, a silent archive of evidence. Photos, screenshots, timestamps, and official credentials. He felt the weight of every humiliation, every dismissive glance, and every coded phrase that had minimized him. The phone buzzed. Jamal's name flashed across the screen. "Malik, you ready?" Jamal asked, voice low but urgent. "I'm getting there," Malik replied. "I've compiled everything. Videos, timestamps, witnesses. The officer doesn't even know the extent of what I have." "You sure you want to go public?" Jamal asked. "Once this hits, there's no turning back. Social media, press, everyone sees it." "I know," Malik said, fingers tapping the desk. "But it's not just about me anymore. It's about showing the pattern. Abuse of power. Systemic bias. If I stay quiet, it continues." Jamal exhaled. "Okay, so what's the plan?" Malik leaned back, mind racing through possibilities. "First, we get legal counsel on board, someone who understands internal affairs. Then we notify trusted journalists. I want witnesses lined up, everything documented in advance. Every piece of evidence has to be airtight. The officer can't twist the narrative." "Sounds solid," Jamal said. "But you're sure the officer hasn't noticed any of this yet?" "He's blind to it," Malik said. "Arrogance makes people careless. He assumes authority shields him. That's his weakness." Later that afternoon, Malik met with his lawyer, Ms. Rivera, a sharp, no-nonsense professional who had handled civil rights cases before. "So," she said, scanning the documents Malik had laid out, "you've got multiple forms of evidence. Video, witnesses, official credentials, social media posts." "Yes," Malik replied. "I want to ensure that nothing he can say will undermine the facts." She nodded. "Good. The goal is exposure, but legally airtight exposure. We can escalate to internal affairs, media, or both. But timing is crucial." Malik's hands tightened around his coffee mug. "He humiliated me publicly. But I want more than personal vindication. I want the system to acknowledge the pattern, to recognize that this isn't just one officer's arrogance. It's institutional bias." Ms. Rivera leaned back. "Then we build a narrative that is impossible to ignore. Each witness corroborates a piece of the story. The video show behavior. The documents show position. Everything intersects. He won't have room to maneuver." By evening, Malik convened a small group of trusted colleagues and friends in his apartment. Screens were set up, evidence displayed in meticulous order. Jamal spoke first. Malik, you've documented everything. This is strong. But the key is presentation. Emotional, factual, and public. People need to see the injustice to believe it. Malik nodded. Exactly. I don't want this to feel like a personal vendetta. It's about accountability, systemic reform, and exposing the arrogance of those who think authority excuses cruelty. One of his colleagues, a journalist named Layla, added, "We can frame this with context, not just a precinct incident, but the larger patterns, other complaints, statistics about racial bias, internal culture, that amplifies a story without attacking you personally." The discussion continued, dialogue looping between strategy and evidence, careful wording and public optics. Every detail mattered. Every word, gesture, and timestamp had to be verifiable. Malik's determination sharpened as plans solidified. By nightfall, Malik reviewed every clip, every image, and every note. He rehearsed his statements, imagining the press, the Internal Affairs Board, the City Council, and the wider public. He anticipated questions, challenges, dismissive tones, and coded bias. "Are you nervous?" Aisha asked quietly, watching him pace. "Always," Malik admitted, "but fear isn't the same as hesitation. I know what's at stake. For me, for the city, for anyone who might face this in the future. Exposure is the only way to ensure accountability." The phone rang again. Jamal. "The officer's been bragging at the precinct. Claims no one will believe a smug rich director. That arrogance, it's exactly what we need." Malik's lips pressed into a thin line. Then he'll learn the consequences of underestimating people he thinks are powerless. That night, Malik stared at the city lights, rain lightly streaking the windows. He imagined a coming confrontation. Press cameras, witness statements, and a city watching as one officer's arrogance collided with evidence and strategy. It wouldn't be easy. The officer still held power, and the bureaucracy favored him. But the moment of reckoning was approaching. And deep inside, Malik understood the truth. Exposure was more than vengeance. It was a statement that authority was accountable, that bias would be confronted, and that dignity could reclaim ground even in the face of systemic oppression. Somewhere in the precinct, the officer continued his evening routine. Unaware that a storm was approaching, one meticulously calculated, one impossible to dismiss. Malik closed his briefcase, determination burning brighter than exhaustion. The first step had been taken. The system had been challenged. And tomorrow, the exposure would begin. The conference room buzzed with quiet anticipation. Cameras clicked, microphones lined the table, and reporters murmured as they adjusted their notes. Malik stood at the head, briefcase on the table, evidence meticulously arranged. He felt the weight of the room, of the city's attention, and of the officer he was about to confront. "This is a timeline," Malik said, voice steady, eyes sweeping the room. "Every word, every action documented. The officer humiliated me in public, disregarded my credentials, and assumed my guilt solely based on my skin color. We have witnesses, video evidence, and official documentation of my position as Director Customs." A reporter raised a hand. "Sir, do you fear retaliation?" Malik's gaze didn't waver. "The retaliation has already happened. My goal is accountability, not vengeance. The system must recognize patterns of abuse, not just isolated complaints." The door opened abruptly. The officer entered, posture defensive, eyes narrowing as he took in the cameras and the crowd. "Director Thompson," he said, voice forced, "I think this has been blown out of proportion." "Blown out of proportion?" Malik repeated, voice calm but cutting. "You call me a smuggler in the middle of the street. You ignore my identification. You treated me as a criminal while I was performing my duty. That is not a misunderstanding. That is misconduct." The officer laughed, a harsh, defensive sound. "You think everyone will believe your version? You were upset. People overreact all the time." "I was not overreacting," Malik said, opening the briefcase. Documents spilled onto the table. Badges, identification, photos of the incident, screenshots of social media coverage. Everything here is verifiable. Witnesses can attest. This is factual. A reporter leaned forward. Do you have corroboration from within the precinct? Yes, Malik replied. Colleagues present during the incident have provided statements. They confirm the officer's words, actions, and dismissive behavior. This isn't just my perspective. It's reality. The officer's smirk faltered. You've got a lot of documentation, but it's just one person's story against a system that protects us. Malik's jaw tightened. It's not just one story. It's evidence of a pattern. This isn't merely about tonight. It's about systemic abuse of authority. You assume guilt based on appearance. That assumption is why institutions fail. The room fell silent. Cameras clicked, pens scribbled. Even the officer felt the weight of accountability pressing on him. His silence spoke louder than any defense he could muster. Aisha stepped beside Malik, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. Truth doesn't need amplification, she said quietly. It stands on its own. The officer shifted uneasily. You're trying to ruin a career, he said, voice low. You can't prove intent, just perception. Malik met his gaze evenly. Intent doesn't matter when the impact is real. The humiliation, the assumption, the systemic bias, those are facts. And facts speak louder than perception. One of Malik's colleagues spoke up. We've also compiled internal records, officer complaints, and documented patterns. Your actions tonight are consistent with previous behavior. The officer's eyes darted toward the documents. This is preposterous. No, Malik said, calm but firm. It is accountability. You wield power that you assume protected you. But power without responsibility is dangerous. And here it has consequences. A reporter leaned in. What outcome are you seeking? Malik exhaled slowly. Recognition of wrongdoing, corrective action, and public accountability. The goal is not punishment alone. The goal is reform, so that others aren't subjected to the same abuse of authority. The officer's hands clenched, a thin sheen of sweat visible on his brow. He realized, finally, that arrogance and authority could not shield him against documented truth. Outside the room, social media had already begun to amplify the confrontation. Clips, statements, and images were shared in real time. Citizens debated, some outraged, others in disbelief. The weight of public accountability pressed on the officer, constraining him in a way he had never experienced. Malik's voice softened, carrying a quiet, moral authority. This is not about revenge. This is about visibility, so that the next person, the next official, the next bystander knows that power can be challenged and that justice, even if slow, is inevitable. The officer finally turned, face pale and stiff, leaving the room without another word. Cameras captured his departure. Murmurs filled the room. The confrontation had ended, but the consequences had just begun. Malik closed his briefcase slowly. The documents, witnesses, and evidence were no longer just tools. They were statements of truth, visible for the world to witness. Aisha squeezed his hand. You did it, she whispered. Yes, Malik said, voice quiet but determined. But the fight isn't over. Not until systemic bias is acknowledged, not until accountability is embedded in the institutions, not just in headlines. And in that charged silence, the room seemed to understand something unspoken. The reckoning had begun. The officer's arrogance had collided with truth, and the city had watched. Nothing would ever be the same. The Internal Affairs Office hummed with the quiet, purposeful energy of bureaucracy. Malik entered with Aisha at his side, briefcase in hand, the weight of the previous confrontation still pressing on him. Officers shuffled papers, tapped keyboards, and exchanged looks that spoke more routine than outrage. Director Thompson, a sergeant, greeted him, voice formal. Please have a seat. We'll review your complaint and the evidence submitted. Malik placed a briefcase on the table, opening it with deliberate care. Documents, photos, screenshots, and timestamps sprawled in neat order. Every piece was a testament to the officer's behavior. Every witness statement a mirror of systemic bias. Your evidence is extensive, the sergeant said, but internal reviews take time. Protocol must be followed. Multiple layers of oversight, corroboration, and verification are required. Malik's jaw tightened. I understand, but it's already been weeks since the incident. The officer continues to work without repercussions. The delay itself perpetuates the harm. The sergeant nodded slowly. I appreciate the frustration. Internal affairs operates according to regulations. We cannot rush procedure without jeopardizing due process. Aisha leaned closer to Malik. Patience, she whispered. Your documentation is airtight. That's what matters. Malik exhaled, trying to steady himself. I just want accountability. Is that too much? The sergeant's eyes softened slightly. It's not too much. It's just slow. Systems are designed to prevent arbitrary punishment, but that also slows justice. Over the next hours, Malik presented testimony, videos, and corroborating statements. Dialogue between him, investigators, and other officers revealed subtle resistance. Coded language, attempts to minimize the officer's misconduct, and bureaucratic politeness masking reluctance. Pattern of behavior? One investigator asked. Yes, Malik replied. This officer has previous complaints for similar conduct. Disrespect, microaggressions, dismissive behavior. The pattern shows systemic bias. Documentation? Another officer inquired. Malik handed over screenshots, emails, internal reports. Everything verified, time-stamped, and corroborated. The lead investigator murmured. Procedurally, this may require suspension pending full review. Malik felt a flicker of cautious hope. And the timeline? How soon will this be resolved? The sergeant hesitated. I cannot guarantee a date. Thorough investigation must proceed, but the evidence will weigh heavily in your favor. Even as a procedural safeguard slowed immediate action, Malik recognized progress. His persistence and meticulous documentation had forced the system to confront the officer, even if incrementally. Days later, Malik received an official notice. The officer was suspended pending investigation. The message was formal, stripped of emotion, but the weight of its meaning resonated. Justice was slow, but it had begun. In meetings with the city council and internal affairs, Malik's role shifted from victim to consultant. His voice, informed by lived experience and methodical evidence, guided procedural reforms. Dialogue with council members highlighted the tension between institutional inertia and social pressure. Mr. Thompson, a council member said, reviewing Malik's report, this officer's behavior reflects a broader problem. Policies need revision to prevent similar cases. What would you recommend? Malik responded with calm authority. Mandatory bias training, transparent reporting mechanisms, and expedited review processes. Systems must ensure that authority is accountable and bias cannot thrive unchecked. Another council member asked, but how do we address the culture, not just the individual? That requires systemic change, Malik said. Accountability, visibility, and education. Institutions must acknowledge bias exists and failure to act perpetuates it. Otherwise, reforms are symbolic, not practical. Even with progress, Malik felt the emotional cost. He had faced humiliation, microaggressions, and public scrutiny. Dialogue with Aisha that evening was quiet, intimate. They'll see the results, she said softly. You've changed the course of the system. I hope so, Malik admitted, but there's still work to do. This officer's suspension is a step, not the solution. Change is slow, painful, and incomplete. He stared at the city lights, reflecting on every conversation, every document, every uncomfortable interaction. Institutional reckoning wasn't theatrical. It was procedural, bureaucratic, and often frustratingly slow. Yet it was necessary. The officer's suspension made headlines, a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but Malik understood the lesson. Accountability was less about dramatic exposure and more about consistent, methodical challenge to power. By the week's end, the officer faced internal hearings, potential termination, and scrutiny from the media. Malik's persistence had forced consequences, but he also knew that institutional reform was ongoing, requiring vigilance, courage, and strategic engagement. As Malik closed his office door that evening, a quiet sense of resolve settled over him. The battle had not ended, but the system had begun to respond. Patience, evidence, and moral clarity had tilted the scales. And somewhere in the shadows of bureaucracy, the suspended officer understood the shield of authority could no longer hide the consequences of unchecked bias. Malik stepped out of the courthouse, the midday sun harsh on his face. Camera flashes flickered across the steps as reporters jostled for angles. His briefcase hung heavy at his side, a quiet reminder of the evidence he had carried and the battle he had fought. Director Thompson, a journalist, called out, "How does it feel to see action finally taken?" Malik inhaled deeply. "It's not about me," he said, voice steady. "It's about accountability. Justice moves slowly, but every step counts." A crowd of onlookers murmured, some nodding in approval, others whispering doubts. Social media was alive with debates, threads dissecting the incident and the officer's suspension. Some called it long overdue. Others questioned the process. Jamal appeared beside Malik, umbrellas shielding them both from a sudden drizzle. "You did it," he said. "The officer suspended. Internal Affairs is reviewing policies. People are talking." Malik exhaled, tension loosening slightly. "Yes, but it's more complicated than that. Every article, every post, it reminds me of how fragile dignity can be in a biased system. One confrontation doesn't erase the humiliation, the assumptions, the microaggressions. Aisha joined them, hand in Malik's. But it shows that change is possible, that the system can be held accountable, even if slowly." Inside the office, the atmosphere was cautiously celebratory. Colleagues offered congratulations, smiles that were genuine but tinged with recognition of the broader struggle. Dialogue reflected the emotional toll. "You handled it beautifully," one colleague said. "Most people would have crumbled." "I didn't crumble," Malik said softly. "I just documented, observed, acted strategically. That's the only way to navigate the system." Even as praise flowed, Malik noticed subtle shifts, lingering questions from new employees, hesitant glances from older staff. Conversations cut short when the topic touched race or authority. Microaggressions hadn't vanished. The system's culture had merely been punctured, not healed. That evening, Malik and Aisha sat on the apartment balcony. City lights shimmered across the wet streets below. "It's quiet now," Aisha said. "Do you feel relief?" Malik shook his head slowly. "Relief is temporary. Trauma lingers. I feel cautious optimism. The officer is accountable, yes, but the system isn't perfect. The scrutiny will fade, and bias doesn't disappear overnight." Aisha nodded. "You've changed the course for others, Malik. That counts." Malik's mind drifted back to that streetlight, the patrol car, the sneer, and the humiliation. Each memory was a small scar, but juxtaposed against today's outcomes, those scars were markers of resilience, not defeat. At work, Malik was invited to participate in policy reform discussions. His voice carried weight now, not only because of his position, but because of the credibility he had earned through calm, factual, and strategic action. Dialogue with policymakers and colleagues demonstrated both challenge and hope. "Director Thompson, how can we prevent this in the future?" asked the council liaison. "Transparency, accountability, training, and oversight," Malik said. "Systems must anticipate bias and protect those who are vulnerable. It's not just about one officer. It's about culture." His words were met with nods, some hesitant, some hopeful. Change, he realized, was incremental, requiring both vigilance and collective action. Yet the personal cost remained. Malik noticed the nights when he replayed the incident in his mind, the whispers of doubt, the pressure of public scrutiny. Even small gestures, casual comment from colleagues or strangers, reminded him that systemic bias persisted. Aisha rested her head on his shoulder. "You survived this," she said softly, "and you made a difference. That's what matters." Malik squeezed her hand. "Yes, but survival isn't the same as peace. It's endurance. And for real change, endurance must be combined with strategy, with persistence. Otherwise, injustice quietly reasserts itself." As the city lights flickered against rain-streaked windows, Malik felt the weight of both victory and caution. The officer had faced consequences. Internal Affairs had acted. The public had witnessed the confrontation. But systemic reform required constant engagement, and the emotional cost of speaking truth to power lingered like a shadow. By the week's end, social media threads and local news reflected the change, some positive, some critical, but all acknowledging the confrontation and the officer's suspension. Dialogue among citizens, colleagues, and officials suggested an awareness that systemic bias was no longer invisible. Malik exhaled quietly, a small smile touching his lips. The battle had been arduous, the humiliation deep, but progress was undeniable. And as the city moved around him, oblivious, indifferent, yet subtly shifted, he understood one truth: resilience, courage, and strategic action could bend the arc of accountability, even in a flawed system. And somewhere beneath that quiet night, Malik knew the struggle would continue, but now he was ready. The office felt quieter than usual. Malik walked through the corridors with a calm he hadn't felt since that night under the streetlight. Colleagues greeted him with nods, smiles tinged with respect, and occasional hushed words of admiration. The city had seen his confrontation. Internal affairs had acted, and now the officer faced formal proceedings that threatened to end his career. Morning, Malik, Jamal said, holding coffee. Looks like the storm's finally settling. Malik nodded, smiling faintly. For him, maybe, but storms leave traces. Jamal raised an eyebrow. You mean the office gossip, the microaggressions? Yes, Malik replied. People talk, they judge, assumptions linger. The system changes slowly, even when accountability is enforced. But the important part is that the officer can no longer act with impunity. In his office, Malik reviewed emails and reports. Policies were being revised, protocols updated, training programs implemented. Tangible signs that his actions had a ripple effect. Dialogue with city officials confirmed it. Internal reforms were underway, and the public had witnessed both evidence and consequences. Aisha knocked and entered, carrying a small stack of documents. Looks like your recommendations are being taken seriously, she said. Malik leaned back, hand resting on the briefcase he had carried throughout the ordeal. Change is incremental, he said quietly. But it matters. Even small steps prevent someone else from enduring what I did. Later that day, the officer's suspension became official public record. Media coverage highlighted both Malik's strategic exposure and the broader discussion on systemic bias. Comments on social media reflected a shift. Outrage tempered with understanding, dialogue replacing ignorance. Malik watched a news clip showing city officials discussing bias training. He allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Justice had arrived, not as spectacle, but as consequence, tangible and unavoidable. Yet even in victory, there was a cost. He remembered the streetlight, the patrol car, the laughter and humiliation. Memories of whispered judgments and dismissive glances lingered. Dialogue with colleagues reminded him that bias did not vanish with exposure. Vigilance was required. In a private moment, Malik spoke to Aisha. It feels strange. Triumphant, yes, but also exhausting. The system bends slowly. The emotional toll, it doesn't disappear with one victory. You've made a difference, she said softly. You've turned personal injustice into systemic accountability. That counts more than any headline. Malik nodded, reflecting on the journey. Each chapter of humiliation, confrontation, and strategy had taught patience, precision, and resilience. He realized that even when the system faltered, deliberate, evidence-driven action could force accountability. Weeks later, Malik returned to fieldwork at Customs. Colleagues treated him with respect. Some quietly acknowledged the ordeal. He carried himself with quiet authority, aware that the public and professional scrutiny remained, but fortified by experience and principle. Dialogue at staff meetings was now more conscious, more cautious, signaling a subtle cultural shift. The officer, once confident in unchecked power, faced ongoing internal proceedings and public censure. His reputation, once bolstered by authority, had been eroded by documented truth and systemic exposure. The consequences were real, unavoidable, and instructive. Malik reflected on the entire ordeal, the humiliation, the microaggressions, the bureaucracy, the public confrontation, and the eventual reckoning. Emotional scars remained, but so did clarity and purpose. He had endured, documented, and transformed personal injustice into public accountability. A final phone call from Jamal brought a quiet smile. City Council disapproved the new protocols. Your persistence paid off. People are listening now. Malik exhaled slowly, relief mixing with lingering vigilance. Yes, he said, but the fight isn't over. Not for the system, not for others, and not for me. I carry the memory, the lesson, and the responsibility. He looked out the window at the city below, the lights shimmering in rain-slick streets. The night that began with humiliation had ended in consequence, accountability, and cautious hope. And though systemic change was ongoing, Malik knew one truth. Courage, strategy, and resilience could bend even a slow arc of justice. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel peace. Fragile, quiet, and hard-earned, knowing the work of integrity and accountability continued. But that one battle had been won.